Later that evening, the Fat Controller spoke to Patrick. The borrowed diesel, here to replace Gordon while he was away being mended, had caused a nasty accident with Donald by taking too many freight cars and getting stuck on Gordon's hill. "You need to know your limits, Patrick," he said severely. "Things could have been really nasty."
"Aye," Douglas put in angrily. "Now Donald's had to go to the works to be mended, and who's going to look after his trains now?"
"I've arranged to borrow another engine from the other railway," the Fat Controller replied. A moment later, the horn of another diesel engine sounded out. A worried look crossed Duck's face as an ominously familiar black shape backed across the turntable. "Good evening," Diesel said as he backed down into the shed. The other engines exchanged angry looks. They knew this wasn't going to turn out well. Next morning, Douglas puffed onto the turntable. He was due to take a passenger train up to Elsbridge station. He had heard about Diesel from Duck and couldn't help being concerned. Douglas slowly approached where Diesel was shunting. "Where are my passenger coaches?" he asked. "They're in the siding," Diesel replied. Douglas came to a stop. He could see where his passenger coaches were buried behind a whole lot of freight cars.
"I need to take my train,"
he complained. "Well, you'll just have to wait," Diesel said. "I am busy."
"You'll get those trucks out of the way now, thank you very much."
Reluctantly, Diesel did so, but by the time Douglas backed down onto his passenger train, he was already running late. He slowly pulled out, furious. Doug was right, he said to himself. Yon Diesel is right unpleasant. The Fat Controller was waiting for Douglas when he reached Brendan's station. Now, Douglas, what sort of time do you call this?" he said.
"It was that Diesel," Douglas replied angrily. "He did not have my coaches ready."
"Do we have to have him here, sir?" "I'm afraid so," the Fat Controller replied. "It's only temporary until Donald and Gordon get back." Douglas still wasn't happy, and he was fuming as he pulled out.
"It's all that Patrick's fault,"
he thought to himself as he puffed along the line. "If he hadn't caused that accident with Donald, Diesel wouldn't have to be here." He was still cross when he pulled into Elsbridge station. Percy was shunting in the yard.
"You look a bit put out, Douglas,"
he observed as he buffed up to a freight car. Before Douglas could reply, a loud wheesh sounded from Percy's cylinders. The little green engine tried to move, but he couldn't.
"Are you all right, Percy?"
Douglas asked, worried.
"No,"
Percy replied.
"I can't move."
It was at this point that Thomas arrived. A worried look crossed his face as he saw Percy's situation. "What happened?" he asked.
"Percy's gone and broken down."
"What about those tankers? The milk's going to go off in the sun." Thomas was right. A string of 4 milk tankers stood on a siding in the hot sun.
"Douglas," Percy said, "can you please take care of that for me?" "But who'll take my passengers?"
Douglas replied. Suddenly, a familiar rumble filled the air. Patrick came along the line and slowed to a halt as he saw the steam engine's concerned looks. "What's happened?" he asked. "Percy's broken down," Thomas explained. "Douglas needs to help him in the yard, but then there's nobody to take Douglas's passengers." "Oh, I'll take care of those. I'll couple them onto my freight train," Patrick replied. He was always ready to help.
"Careful, Patrick. You need to know your limits, remember?"
"I do remember, and this will be well within my limits, trust me." Douglas looked doubtful, but he didn't really have much of a choice. His fireman quickly ran over and arranged it with the station master. A few minutes later, Patrick moved off with Douglas's passenger coaches as Douglas approached the milk tankers. Later that day, Douglas had finished shunting in the yard. He buffered up to Percy, ready to help the small green engine to the works station.
"I shouldn't have left those milk tankers in the sun like that," Percy said.
"Didn't you fash yourself?" Douglas replied as they moved off. Later that evening, Douglas returned to the shed. It had been a long day. He stopped just outside the shed. Henry and James were sitting on the turntable leads and they looked angry. Douglas could see why. Trucks blocked the entrance to the turntable. Diesel sat on one of the turntable tracks, looking smug. "We Diesels don't need to be coddled in a shed," he said. "We're quite happy to stay out all night."
"Well, we're not," James replied, "so you better let us in."
"I don't think so," Diesel replied. Douglas was indignant.
"What right do you have to block us out of our own shed?"
"What are you going to do?" Diesel replied. "Tattle to the Fat Controller?" It was at this point that Patrick arrived. He took in the situation at a glance. He wasn't surprised. He had been expecting Diesel to try something like this. "James," he said. "Please get out of the way." James's driver backed him off the turntable lead and into a siding. Patrick backed up and left his trucks behind. Then he accelerated forward. A horrified look crossed Diesel's face as Patrick slammed into him, pushing him back towards the turntable pit. "I've had it with you," Patrick said angrily. "You sloppy, rude locomotive. Is it any wonder that our controller takes any chance to send you away? You're going to sort this out, now." Yes, all right," Diesel replied, scared. Both engines looked down. The Fat Controller stood there, an angry look on his face. "Diesel," he said, "what is the meaning of this?" Diesel stammered. "Put this right, as Patrick said, and you'll go home. I wish speaking to your controller." "Yes, sir," Diesel agreed reluctantly. Later, the engines were in the shed. "I'm sorry," Patrick said. "I shouldn't have lost my temper like that." "It's no bother," Douglas replied. "Yes," agreed James. "You sent Diesel packing all right." Just then a familiar whistle sounded out. A moment later, Gordon backed into the shed. "I saw Diesel heading home in disgrace," he said. "What did I miss?" Patrick here sent him packing," Douglas replied. The next day, Donald returned, and it was time for Patrick to leave. All the other engines came to see him off. "Take care," Douglas said. "Yes," Duck added, "and you're welcome back any time." "I'll look forward to coming back," Patrick replied. Then with a toot of his horn, he was off.